Hello, everyone. Hello, Internet people, to the first What If History podcast, past, present, and future. My name's Brock Rills.
My name's Zach Hartwick.
Perfect. And basically the premise of what we're going to try and do here is look at historical events and also current events and see how either the course of history would be changed or what we think may happen into the future. I think for today, we're going to focus on historical events. One that actually I did a little bit more research into, Zach, and it seems like it might be not completely true, or may just be what's the word I'm looking for? An urban legend. That's what I'm looking for. But we should. What was the name of the? Basically, I'm just going to see. I want to look up the name of that soldier.
The British soldier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was reading what you were talking about, how the story itself came from, basically the idea of the story is there was a British soldier who saw a wounded German soldier in World War I walking across like a misty, smoky trench line. He had he was injured, had no guns, anything like that. And he basically
Which already sounds like mysticism.
Yeah, right.
In itself.
He was dazed. Really
Henry Tandey.
Yeah, Andrew Tandey. That's what it was.
Tandey. Yeah.
Yeah. And he basically he saw this soldier there. Put his rifle on him. Was ready to take the shot. Saw that he was unarmed. The German soldier saw him. Was basically like, "All right, I'm dead. You can shoot me." And the British soldier let him go. Tandey let him go. And evidently that soldier was Adolf Hitler. So, but go ahead, because you were saying it's not necessarily a true story, because the source of the story is Hitler himself. So you know what I mean.
Exactly. So there's a BBC article written by Bethan Bell here from BBC News, and basically kind of goes into a bit more detail on the story. But basically, this guy Henry Tandey was the most decorated private in World War I. And exactly as Zach said, that there was a couple times that he tempered. I forget what the tempered bravery with mercy. Mm-hmm. And so this story kind of arose out of that. And it was known that he had spared a few soldiers, and so it was entirely possible that Hitler could have heard about that. And apparently, the first time the story comes up is when Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of Britain at the time, went to visit Hitler in 1938, and at that time Hitler regaled him with a story of that he could have died in World War I and yada yada yada. But it's a lot of other people are also saying that this was another kind of propaganda tactic that Hitler was using, and knew that Chamberlain would eat up, because basically what this shows from Hitler's side is that it was ordained by God or whoever that he should live so that he could become the great Führer of Germany or whatever. That's what he was trying to sell. That's what he was trying to put out there. And so that's where there's a lot of skepticism that comes in, because he was doing it to kind of help his own image.
Yeah, and that was at the time too, where it wasn't during wartime, because when Chamberlain had met him, he was still kind of just using his political muscle. He was, he was the man of the year, Time magazine. He'd rebuilt Germany, and he was kind of this like mastermind, but not necessarily at the time known as, the evil figure he would come to be. But, he was still, stuff was still going on. He was masking that, and he was really just trying to create this image, like you said, that he was, it was preordained. Yeah. He was gonna rebuild the German Empire, the Reich. And, it was something that, couldn't.
And this is all during Chamberlain's Peace in Our Time, like, stuff he was selling, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, they didn't want a Great War, which understandable. But
what was the term? What was the term for that? I'm forgetting it right now. They were making concessions to Hitler, and there was actually a term for it. I can't remember what it was.
I'm not 100% sure. But like, cause like that's the thing, they did appeasements, I suppose. Yeah, that's what it was, appeasement policy.
Appeasement, that's what it was.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So basically they ended up giving him Austria, Czech Republic, and then he started taking a bit too big of too ambitious pieces of territory, and finally, it eventually led to war, of course, which is exactly what he was looking to do. He was going to take as much as he could before,
exactly.
Before it actually came to arms, because that's where he wanted it to go anyway. So.
Shake someone's hand with one hand and stab them in the back with the knife with the other, basically.
Literally. Well, that's the thing, right? Like, I mean, he'd made deals with Stalin well before the war, but the whole time he obviously planned on invading Soviet Russia. Like, it was never a permanent thing. He just didn't necessarily want to fight them both at the same time, because obviously you saw.
But then ended up attacking them anyway.
Yeah,
like an idiot.
Yeah, exactly. It all fell apart on him in the end, but. That's not really what we want to talk about. Yeah.
No. So and it's important though. First, I like where we're on here because we want to, in the same way that philosophers of old would, you spend half of your book on definition. You spend half of your book on defining what you're going to say and kind of taking away a lot of the criticisms that could be. So what we're doing here at the start is we're trying to show all the holes in this story to then get to the fiction section. And so just to kind of go through a couple more quick details on why this is probably not legit. So Tandey was interviewed shortly after Chamberlain's visit, and his answer to the press was, "I guess I met him before." Basically, and it was later on after they'd been bombed in World War II, and then they found him and asked him again, right after his house had been bombed. And then he's like, "What have I done?" So, I don't know if that's an emotional response, but another one is apparently Chamberlain, after he heard about this, came back to Britain and then telephoned Tandey to tell him that, the Fuhrer had told him the story. But that's really difficult considering Tandey didn't own a telephone.
Yeah, which obviously wouldn't be a common thing for a regular soldier to have, right? Not at the time.
No, but he was a civvy at this point, right?
Exactly.
He didn't have a phone at his house.
So yeah, somebody who's on probably a soldier's salary, worked a blue collar job, likely in peacetime. You know what I mean? Yeah, I agree. It seems a bit even if the story was true, I would find it unlikely that Chamberlain would then, go home and then telephone up this soldier, you know what I mean, to tell him the story that he let the Fuhrer live, who at the time, it's not that crazy at the time, you know what I mean? He hadn't done any horrible things that were known to the world at the time, so he wouldn't be like, "Oh, you let this horrible person live," right? What would be the point of him telephoning him at the time and telling him that, right? So... Yeah.
Well, he did in '38. He didn't know that Hitler was terrible, right?
Exactly.
Chamberlain thought peace in our time. So, but my just again, I want to kind of touch on all the points this article touched on because there's a lot of good reasons to be skeptical about this. Another one is that Hitler was on leave during the time that this event was supposed to happen.
He was wounded, right? Because he was wounded by the time he was still recovering when the war ended.
No, but again, that could all be fake too. Hitler could have just made that up. What I'm saying is that Hitler was actually his battalion was 50 miles north of where Tandey was on that date. Mm-hmm. So I'll just read what he has here. 2 events that were separated by 20 years on 28th September 1918, Private Tandey earned the Victoria Cross for most conspicuous bravery initiative. 20 years later, Hitler himself said to have planted the seeds of legend during a visit, blah, 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 blah. Long story short, there's a lot of... There's more than likely not true, more than likely propaganda.
Which the Germans are great at.
Exactly, especially during World War II. But... Hitler gets killed by Tandey. Let's say the story's true.
Yeah, he pulls the trigger.
What happens next? Hitler's dead on the ground, bullet through his head, blood raining down his little mustache, and that's it. The Nazi party is done. They're stopped in their tracks. World War II never happened.
Well, that's not necessarily true either, right? So let's go back and just say so he's dead. And you know what? To be honest, it doesn't really matter at that point because in World War One, Hitler was pretty much a nobody. He was
he was a private as well, basically.
Exactly. Like he wasn't an officer, or at least a senior.
Honestly,
officer.
he was really a nobody until right around the time he seized the power of the Nazi Party. Like. He had a growing popularity, but his incline of popularity and fame is steep.
It's true.
Like it happened.
It really is.
Quickly.
Like if we want to kind of take a look at what actually happened, is like he didn't even start the Nazi Party. Let's go back to that actually. He joined that party, and he slowly kind of worked his way up and then. It pretty much did a coup on the leadership, took it over, didn't completely change its ideals. It kind of was what it was at the time, and that's why he joined it, right? And anti-Semitism
tried to coup the government.
Well, he did coup the government,
and then he failed.
Yeah,
and they arrested him.
Yeah. There's the beer hall push, basically, where he tried to do an armed overthrow of the government, which failed miserably. Several of his men were killed. He went to jail for several years, which made him extremely bitter.
Yeah, it's almost like something like that happened recently.
Yeah, really, right? It's you can see.
Let's not let that be their beer hall push.
Yeah, exactly, right. But this kind of thing was common in Germany at the time. It was common in a lot of different places at the time where. These parties would pretty much just go out and have street fights. They would fight each other. See who's stronger, and that would give.
Man, have you ever watched the Italian Parliament? Like, go watch the Italian Parliament today. Like whatever the time is, they get intense, man. They get pretty close to blows, like in the legislature. Like it.
Sometimes
it's pretty intense, to be honest with you.
That's what you might want to do sometimes. I could see why that would happen. You have to start putting people like UFC fighters in on your candidates. You know what I mean?
Get them to run. All right, you're going to run in this round. Like in your sure riding, so make sure that they get in. And then all of a sudden the fight.
That'd be hilarious.
Oh, man. But one thing I wanted to bring up, and I think you and I talked about a few things in the lead up to this episode, into our inaugural episode. But one thing we didn't talk about, and I know I said that Hitler's incline of popularity was very steep, but he did have he had some creeping popularity of his ideas, even if he himself didn't have personal popularity because of Mein Kampf. And so that to me is the biggest lynch piece in this whole story. In terms of how much would have been different if Hitler was killed in World War I. And I think his biggest contribution in terms of building it to what it was Mein Kampf, because a lot of regular Germans read that and were like, yeah, the Treaty of Versailles was terrible. We're getting the short end of the stick. This guy Hitler was just trying to like help help Germany be great again. And now he's, in jail, and this is, whatever. So, and then when he got out and he served his time in 33 or 32, whenever it was, or 31, I can't remember when he got out, but it was not too long after that he continued in a leadership role in the Nazi Party, and then won an election, and then so he did it the democratic way at first, but then he forced out all of his opponents and criminalized them.
Pretty much. They, at the time, in Germany, it was pretty much the government was in complete shambles. Like after World War I, there was some pretty heavy reparations laid down on them. The German Empire was disbanded essentially. They became the Kaiser abdicated. They became a republic. But they had that pretty much forced on them. They weren't quite ready for it yet, and all of these parties came together, and there was a lot of violence amongst them because people were just jockeying for power. There was mass inflation, there was mass poverty, there was some pretty bad stuff going on there. Lots of unemployment. So things were ripe for a takeover essentially, right? Like they were looking for somebody to lead them out of the mess that they were in.
And also, as a catalyst, anti-Semitism was rampant during the 19th century. I mean, absolutely. You could still argue that it's still an issue today, a huge issue today.
Absolutely.
And so, but especially back then, it was like Hitler realized that they were the perfect scapegoat, and that's why he used it.
Absolutely.
And
it wasn't just in Germany. I mean, anti-Semitism was everywhere in all the major countries.
Oh yeah, all
time,
Europe,
right?
all across Europe, because it was this idea that, like, I think people resented the fact that Jews continued to maintain their own culture and their own religion and their own faith, and that continued to make them a set apart target, so to speak. And this was an issue, like that, in Spain, in Germany, in Britain, and all across Europe. So I honestly am of the belief, and I know you and I have talked about this as well, but I honestly don't think that much would have changed. I think Mein Kampf was a big one, but again, he was hitting on what he had done is he had put into words what a lot of German people were feeling at the time, but then pointed them at a certain blame, either the Jews or whoever it was, right, which was not necessarily right. But that sentiment of being upset. And so part of me believes that you could have had a Goering or a Goebbels who was charismatic enough to seize that position, even if the party hadn't been called a Nazi party, just that idea of, make Germany great again. Like, it might not have united under the Nazi helm, but it still might have been equally bad.
To be honest, like I honestly I would be more along the lines of it likely becoming a communist government and possibly joining in the Soviet Union, right? Because during the rise,
that's an interesting take.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I mean, during the rise of when Hitler was, taking the Nazi Party, trying to make it big, like the communists were some of his biggest opponents, and they were the people he really hated. It's kind of funny that the Nazi Party is the National Socialist German Workers' Party, because Hitler actually really hated socialists. He hated communism. And communism was a big thing at the time, right? It was kind of new. Different countries were, a lot of different countries were having these parties.
And I'm sure it would have been appealing to the average German at the time, because right? You're like, because, and if for nothing else, even if you don't understand the politics, you see it as a means of getting away from Western influence that's fucked you through the Treaty of Vienna, or through the Treaty of Versailles, right?
Absolutely, right. Like, it's something. It's also, the people in Russia overthrew, the nobility. They overthrew the aristocrats, and they kind of formed their own government. Obviously, it wasn't really going as well as everyone might have thought it was over there, but that wasn't, what the average person would see in another country, right? They would see that the people rose up and taken power for themselves, and that was probably really attractive, right? And, Hitler's party really pretty much stamped out communism completely in Germany. So if he wasn't there, to lead his party, I think that it was quite possible that it could have gone in the other direction. And
well, that was one of the ways they made it that they got rid of it. They just made being a communist illegal.
Oh, completely illegal. It was punishable by death, right? Like, you were done.
Yeah.
So yeah, that, like, I think we could explore that aspect, right? Because obviously we know.
I didn't even think of that. I didn't even think of that.
Like, the Cold War obviously happened immediately after, World War II, where communism and capitalism were kind of just clashing, right?
Would it have been an immediate Cold War then? Like, would Germany have whatever? Or would it have been a world war between Russia and the world? But then here's the other side you got to think of. The reason why Russia was able to industrialize was because of World War II.
I wouldn't say that was true either. They definitely went complete industrialization, just like the German government did, right? They went full on war industry, and that's how they were able to produce so much in such a small amount of time. But they certainly were. The Soviet Union was expansionist. They were attacking Finland at the time. They were fighting with Japan. You know what I mean? Like, they were certainly, they weren't just kind of sitting back waiting for the Germans to attack them, as much as that might have kind of seemed that way.
Well, yeah, they did. No, you're right about Japan, because the Americans basically left at one point too. We're like,
there was a lot going on, like pre World War II that kind of, led to.
Doesn't get talked about.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot that we could go into there, but I think at the time, right, the Soviet Union was certainly, it had its eyes all over the western parts of Europe, or at least Western according to its borders, and I think if there was no conflict that was happening with Germany and the other Western countries, we certainly could have seen a Soviet allied conflict a lot earlier, or it didn't really happen at all, let's say, but it could have happened. Or
maybe they would have industrialized through a Cold War, because there was a lot of industrialization and technological research during the Cold War as well.
And what would have happened if they didn't lose millions of people and have their infrastructure largely obliterated by the German invasion, right? Like, they had a lot to rebuilding to do after. So,
well, because they did burn and turn, right?
Oh, absolutely.
That was the plan.
Like there was
burn and turn. the Germans don't let the Germans have anything.
Exactly.
Burn the village to the ground before they get here.
Western Russia was a wasteland.
like that is. Like, the memes where they drop the sunglasses down, like, and it goes like that, like, you gotta give credit to the Russian people, especially the serfs at the time. They're just like, they literally, they were fighting, when the war started, they were fighting German soldiers with one gun for 5 guys. And the gun was a single, bolt action rifle. So basically and then they took a good portion of those guns and put them behind the front line so that if anybody tried to desert, they would have to shoot them. So, how many guns did they really have on the front line? 1 in 10? And they were told basically, once you see a dead German soldier, take his gun off of him.
Yeah, they certainly did, repurpose a lot of German equipment, that's for sure. But, I mean, honestly, there's a lot of misconception that, the Russians they didn't have anything, they were fighting with friggin' sticks and stones, but that wasn't really true, honestly. They certainly had a lot of...
Well, they had guns, the numbers just didn't line up.
Oh, but that's not really true though, man. Honestly, the amount of tanks that Russia produced and the amount of aircraft was absolutely insane. They lost
after the war. That was after Germany attacked them.
It is true. I'm not saying that. They
might have had a few tanks, but
but their production power was absolutely insane, right? So I think that's definitely a possibility where that could have really changed the course of how things went, in terms of a potential, and at the time, would the Allies have even won against a fully ready to go, non-injured Soviet Union that was creeping across its borders, that had just absorbed Germany and its infrastructure and its population? I don't know, man. That could have been pretty much, if you think about it, the way the advance happened with the Germans, most of Europe pretty much melted immediately, right? And if you add another 5 million Russian soldiers to that, what's going to happen?
We'd all be speaking Russian right now.
Pretty much, right? Or at the very least, the Brits would be, and because I don't know, and communism wasn't also at least pre-World War II, pre-Cold War. Communism was in the United States, you know what I mean? It wasn't entirely stamped out there. It was a real thing. It was very possible for that to go that way as well. Not that they, it was also treated the same way as pretty much in Germany, except for the death penalty, you know what I mean? But if you were a communist, you were probably going to jail, or at least ostracized by your peers. But well, I suppose it probably wasn't criminal until the Cold War, during
some sources I'm saying are saying that they had 23,000 tanks to start World War II. So
it's a lot of tanks, man. It's a lot of tanks.
But that was in 1941.
Well, they didn't invade
until 41, probably.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't invade right away.
41 or 42. But the war actually started in 39.
Yeah, 39 is when it started in Europe.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. They were no joke, but at the same time, it was basically the German technology was just light years ahead of theirs, right? They were absolutely insane.
Well, they were ahead of everybody.
They were ahead of everybody completely, and but I think it was pretty much it was a numbers game, right? Germany was pretty much fighting alone, and everyone was fighting against them, so they couldn't.
During World War II, Russia produced 30.3 million rifles.
That's a lot of rifles. And you know what? It's kind of hilarious because that's totally true. You can literally find, Russian rifles as dime a dozen these days because they produce so friggin' many of them.
So the U.S., keep in mind, the U.S. came in very late to the war, but they produced only 1.9
million rifles.
Guns. Yeah.
And
So,
keep in mind, they were also supplying
30 million
British
to
with
2
guns,
million.
You know what I mean? Like they were pretty much just profiting off the war for a couple of years before they even jumped into it. They were
until Pearl Harbor, and they were like, "Oh, I guess we better get involved."
Yeah, it's like, all right, let's finish this. We're done. But they really just pounced on the weakening enemy is more or less what they did. I guess, I don't know, Japan kind of instigated it, and they were kind of at the height of their power as well, so I shouldn't say that completely.
I'm just looking up the Britain's gun numbers too. Yeah, Britain, just over 1 million. Oh no, overall 5 million.
5 million, yeah.
But they made a lot more complex guns. Like, I was looking at the Soviet, and it was like they only made like 2,000 like submachine guns, whereas British Army made 2 million.
Well, so like I wouldn't say that, because the PPSH was actually a really, really popular gun and really super. They made it super easy to make, so they made that.
Yeah,
thing.
this one's the British one's the Sten.
The Sten, yeah, that was a cool gun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hold on here. Let me just see how many of these people
also
were made.
Just by comparison. So Russia made, like, what did I say the vehicles was? They had 25,000 tanks.
Yeah, something like that.
Britain had 480,943 military trucks and lorries and tanks. So I don't know. That's a combined stat.
Yeah,
that's not just tanks.
Yeah, exactly. Like they had that many military vehicles, basically.
Right,
which is nothing. So yeah, they had like, well, shouldn't say nothing, but honestly, majority of that's probably trucks.
Okay, no, UK was right on par with Russia, basically 27,000 tanks.
Okay, yeah, they were in the war for a long time. Remember that, right?
Yeah,
they were
26,000 armored cars and 69,000 armored personnel carriers.
Just imagine the sheer volume, man. Like, holy.
Well, like every company turned into a military manufacturing.
Pretty much, right?
Like across the world.
Yeah, I know, right? Like it's pretty wild to think about. So this isn't entirely World War II numbers, but from 1941 to 1947, the Russians made 6 million PPSH submachine guns.
Jesus.
Yeah, they were literally like they made them so they were just like metal stampable, so you could turn like just a regular like street corner machine shop into a gun factory, like because they were so simple, but they were effective, right?
Right. Yeah, it works, right?
That's the thing. They didn't have like the most amazing stuff, but it was still pretty ingenious engineering for the time. You use what you have, mass produce it, use your numbers to your advantage, and that's exactly what they did.
Yeah. So coming back to our main theme.
So that's one possibility.
I like that one. I find that really interesting. Speaking of German politicians, though, not to equate this, but congrats or applause for Andrea Merkel. And she's like, I think the longest serving chancellor in German history. Yeah, I think she did right by, and also as a woman, I think it was funny because it was always like, oh, she's so stone faced, she's so this, and she's whatever, and it's like if it was a guy, that wouldn't even be a criticism. Like it's just kind of funny, but she did her job, she did it well, and I'm sure I wouldn't agree with everything she did politically.
So what's kind of funny is I'm pretty sure actually the SPD, which was a German party during the Weimar Republic, which was after the end of World War I to Nazi Germany, is still actually the party that's in power right now. I'm pretty sure that's Angela Merkel's
the
party.
Weimar Party.
No, it's called the Social Democratic Party of Germany. They're still in parliament right now.
Oh wow, there is a lot.
There is a lot. That's what I said. It was a crazy mishmash of just like people trying to gain
40
power,
parties. Right? There's 40 parties in the Reichstag at that time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the Nazi Party was just one of them, right? And there were a small one at that.
And it was a constitutional. It still was the Weimar Republic because it was like a constitutional monarchy basically at that point. They were forced to.
They had there was no monarchy. Like at that time, the Kaiser had been basically abdicated entirely. So that's when it was entirely in the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, I believe. So yeah, you had the SPD, which is the Social Democratic Party of Germany. That was one of the major parties. You had the KPD, which is the Communist Party of Germany.
And then you had the KAPD, which was like, you guys aren't hardcore communist enough for us, so we're going to go even farther.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think the KAPD was the biggest, like,
they were the opposition party to the SPD.
Like, they were the biggest, yeah. The opposition was the KP. They're both KPD. There's the Kommunistische Partie Deutschland, and then there's the... Oh, why does it have them listed twice here?
Because I'm pretty sure that's just the Communist Party that we're talking about. Yeah.
So, but even other parties on the right, he, like, basically anyone that didn't join his party when he was consolidating was like, you're either with me or you're against me.
Oh, 100%. That's exactly what it had. Like, they essentially absorbed a lot of the right and unified it, and then entirely just crippled the left.
Okay, let's say a more moderate party was somehow able to seize power, like the KVP, like the Conservative People's Party, or like center, like German Democratic Party, like their Social Liberal Party. Okay, so there was a precursor to the Nazi Party too. It's the DAP.
Yeah, exactly. That's the one that, like, Hitler founded the Nazi Party aspect of it, but it was like an evolution of that party. Exactly.
Here's another one. What would have been the effect on Western nations? So Britain, the United States, Canada, if, let's say, World War II didn't happen and one of these centrist liberal parties took over and eventually they got out of the Treaty of Versailles through political means and became an independent and unified Germany. And
I think that would be the big thing is, do they get out of the Treaty of Versailles? Do they have to stop paying reparations, right? Because the reparations were heavy and...
Well, they were terrible.
Basically, Hitler was just like, we're not paying those, and they didn't do it.
My point is, though, is Germany's not the main actor here anymore. I'm not focusing on Germany. So Germany has gotten out of the Treaty of Versailles. Let's say a centrist government got it in, and they did the same thing as Hitler in that regard. That they just said eventually got to a point where we're not paying this anymore, and we will go to war over it if you want to, but we really don't think it's fair. Do you really think it's fair? And they probably wouldn't have. But then, as part of the reason why they were okay with it is because Hitler had militarized so much, right?
Yeah, well, that's why they let them out. Exactly. They didn't want another conflict to rise up. So I think that is a question to be explored, is like, would they have gotten out of it? And if they didn't, honestly, I think they just would have been an impoverished country for quite a while. You know what I mean? Like, you'd have to have some sort of pretty amazing turnaround to get out of what they were in. So realistically, let's say if that is the case, they're pretty much just a non-actor, like you said.
So that's my point. The non-actor. So my question is then, how does that affect the West? Because I feel like after World War II, a lot of the soldiers came back, and they, like, the ones, especially, it was a lot of American soldiers, honestly, that liberated the camp.
It was.
Yeah. And I feel like they brought that back with them and did their best ability to teach their kids about the grotesque level of racism that was needed to have against a certain group of people for that kind of thing to happen. And there's even videos I'm sure you've seen this one before, it's like a black and white video, and there's a guy standing up and trying to scapegoat some group, and a guy in the crowd goes, "I've heard this kind of speaking before."
Yeah.
And then, whatever. I can't remember the videos, but whatever.
I know what you mean. Like, would because, like, that act essentially
would the United States be more or less racist than they are right now? That's the question. That's really the question I'm asking.
If I'm
going to be blatantly honest.
And there was a lot of things that changed because of that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, in the United States pre-World War II, eugenics, which was the idea of, like, sterilizing undesirable traits out of a population, was actually pretty popular in the United States. It was gaining popularity, you know what I mean? So would that have continued? dude, on a like, because pretty much after World War II, they were like, "Whoa, that's not right. The Nazis did that. We shouldn't do that," and it pretty much became.
It goes farther than that. It goes even farther than that. A lot of people say that we wouldn't have unions if we hadn't had, or as strong unions as we have, or people forget unions, or
like workers' rights. You mean
the fact that there are unions and the fact that unions are as strong as they are gets people who aren't unionized better pay too. And there's an argument that is made that a lot of the strikes that happen, including the Winnipeg strike and all these other things, the government's like, if push comes to shove, there's enough well-trained military civilians that this could be a real problem for us if they overthrow the government.
I see what you're saying.
Because as you've said many times during that time, there was a lot of concern about that. And so I think politicians were more wary of their populace, whereas now, I mean, the expression you sent me, hard times make hard people, hard people make good times, good times make soft people.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly right.
And so
we're in the soft population, just by way of how history has gone in the last 30 years, 40 years, right?
And so my question is would those people have fought as hard, knowing what they had been through in World War II, to get fair pay, and would the government have responded seriously, knowing that they don't really have the ability to fight for that?
Well, it would have changed the whole American ideal as well, right? Like, just think of how many people are talking about, we went over and we fought the Germans for freedom. You know what I mean? Like, that wasn't really the case in World War One. Like, they weren't going over there to free Europe. You know what I mean? Like, it was much more colonial than that in World War One. But after World War Two, like, it was very much an idea of like bringing American freedom to the fascists, right? So if that never happened, then how is their national identity going to form, right? It's going to be a little bit.
And how much propaganda was associated with exactly what you're talking about, that was shown to generations and generations of,
Oh yeah,
and so
absolutely right. The Uncle Sam kind of aspect might not have really been a thing. It wouldn't have been. Like Uncle Sam was a World War II thing. I'm pretty sure. So like, there would have been no war bonds. There, it could have been a World War One thing. I don't know, but
I'm not 100% sure.
Me neither. But yeah, like I think it definitely would have changed the way that the whole national identity down there would have went. Even it might have even changed out.
War of 1812.
Okay, so
War of 1812.
It's pretty old. Yeah. Okay. Never mind.
Was the first time I thought it was, because based on his look.
True.
Right.
Yeah. No, that is true. Yeah, he's got the kind of Union look to him.
The war they lost, the Canadians, is the one that Uncle Sam comes from. Amazing.
That's hilarious.
Try it again. Well, like they tried to take us over, and what did we do? We went down. We burned down the White House. So I mean.
Yeah, I don't know if it would go that way this time, but
no, probably
not. But yeah, I think it definitely would have changed how things were. They would have maybe been less militarized. You know what I mean? Like, because if you think about it, they'd kind of de-armed themselves, not necessarily, not completely, but they kind of de-armed themselves after World War One, right? So, but we have to the US, but we also have to kind of take into consideration, like, what's Japan going to be doing? Like, Japan was an imperialistic state as well. They were invading British colonies, French colonies, Dutch colonies, American colonies all over the South, over South Asia. But would they have been so brazen to do so if Germany wasn't already tying up all those countries' forces in Europe, right?
Well, I mean, it goes even farther than that. I mean, is America the hero at all here? Because what did they do after the World War II in 1950s? They went down to South America and basically destroyed democratic regimes down there in the name of freedom, and then lent them money through the International Monetary Fund, and then at an interest rate that you could never pay back. And now those nations are basically indebted to the U.S. forever, but it's not the U.S., the International Monetary Fund, which is run by the U.S.
And going into that aspect of it, right? So would the League of Nations disbanded, and would there have even been a United Nations without World War II? Would there have been a Health Organization?
Whoa!
You know what I mean? So,
that's mind blowing.
It is kind of mind blowing, right? Like all these things.
I think that's the one that Yeah,
go ahead.
This should be the last thing. No, I was gonna say this should just be the last thing. This is what we should close on, because I think this is a big one.
It definitely would be, right? Like we take the UN as something that's been around for a long time, but it really hasn't. You know what I mean? And the first incarnation of the UN failed absolutely miserably.
It failed.
You know what I mean?
It failed. Yeah,
but it failed largely in part to what Hitler was doing. So because it failed because they were unable to prevent a war, which was the whole point of why they were formed in the first place. So
I also think the strength of the UN is that it has no teeth, whereas the League of Nations, they tried to give it teeth, and I think that's part of the reason why it failed. Like, when you think about it, at the end of the day, all the United Nations does is say, like, this is what should happen, and then nations can respond in turn, and they even have votes on stuff, whatever. And then I know people embargo and stuff, but then independent nations still choose to be like, well, we're not going to follow that embargo. Like, so sure. I think it's one of those things, like, if it was binding, that's why it failed. Because everyone thought, okay, well, as basically New World Order in a way, we're all going to get together, all these nations, our representatives, and we're going to vote, and that vote's going to be binding. And other nations were like losing every vote, and they're like, no, we're an autonomous nation, and we're going to do what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you've got the United Nations, and then you've got the European Union. So nations that want to be a part of that have joined the European Union because there's benefits that are associated with it, but then you also kind of have to toe the line a bit more. Again, It still doesn't have the same amount of teeth, but it's more so than the United Nations, and I think that's the strength. But
I could see that. It definitely allows it to be broader for sure, right? But at the same time, it kind of also defeats its own purpose, right? When you have two opposing views of the most powerful countries in the world, there's not a whole lot that can get done, right? So there, it has its weaknesses as well, but I think that's what the League of Nations kind of showed was when push came to shove, the countries weren't really willing to act on the resolutions that they put to, so it just kind of fell apart, right? But if there wasn't that kind of pressure of a new war brewing, it might not have fell apart in the first place, and we could have we likely would have saw an inclusion of Germany into that. We likely would have saw an eventual inclusion.
Well, that was part of the reason it failed. They intentionally excluded, I think, Germany. Wasn't there certain nations that they could come and watch, but they weren't allowed to vote?
Yeah, well, I mean, the United Nations is the same way, though, right? There's definitely I think they're called.
Well, there's two levels.
Nations who basically just kind of get to sit on the sidelines but don't get to vote.
Well, that's basically, if you're not in the Security Council, your vote doesn't mean anything. Like, at the end of the day,
that's not entirely true either.
It is entirely true, because the votes of the nations means nothing. The only time
there's
action
Security
ever
Council
happens,
resolutions and there's non-Security Council resolutions, right?
Yeah, I know what you're saying, but
because there's definitely like countries with observer status who literally have no say at all, So there is different tiers, with the Security Council on the top. I do give you that.
Yeah. So I'm gonna give you a couple of quick questions here to end off, and I want you to answer yes or no.
Sure.
All right, and I'll have to answer the same. So, if Hitler was killed in World War I, would the Nazi Party still have formed?
No.
Not the same. Okay. Assume that if Hitler died in World War I is the start of every one of these questions.
Okay. Yeah.
Would the Communist Party have taken power in Germany? Yes or no?
I would say yes. It's likely.
Okay. Okay, you can give 8-ball answers. I will.
Sorry.
Signs point to yes.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a doubleheader. Would the League of Nations have failed, and would the United Nations have started in its wake? If the answer is yes.
So I think it would not have failed. Therefore, we would be a part of the League of Nations, not the United Nations.
Okay. And I had another one. What was the other thing we discussed? Do you think that the U.S. would be more racist or less racist now?
I think they would probably... I think the entire world in general would probably still be a little more racist.
Here's one we didn't talk about. would Israel be a nation? Yes or no?
I think not likely. You know what I mean?
No,
Not
I think
likely.
no as well. I agree. I don't think it would be. Whether or not saying it's right or wrong, we're just saying whether or not it would have happened. And I agree. I don't think so.
Because like there
I don't
was a
think
lot of
Zionism
shifting
wouldn't have
that
gotten
happened,
the same
right?
push from powerful people.
Like,
yeah.
I think that would
I don't-
probably, or at least potentially, still exist as like the British Mandate of Palestine or whatever it was at the time. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think colonialism would have ended quite as abruptly as it did in the 40s.
True say.
You know what I mean? I think we would still have a
Well,
lot
I think
of,
as a result of World War
excludes.
II, I think one of the best ways, that's when they started realizing more. It's better to have, especially if they're close to us. If they're a colony, then who cares? We'll take advantage of them. But
Yeah.
in terms of inside of Europe, it's like it's better to have democratic governments that are independent than it is to try and control these people from the outside, or do it in a different way. But
Well,
I agree. I think
even think like
No,
we
for
very likely
Israel.
would have been still a colony potentially.
No.
Right? Like, well, just think about
ours
that. No, just think like
ours had little to do with World War II, though.
No,
I think.
we because you think we fought, and a lot of that was like, hey, we came and we fought as a country, so we should be a country. You know what I mean? And that, so if
you're
we
right.
didn't fight at all.
Yeah, you are right about that.
It could have went. I mean, I'm not saying because even at the time before World War II, Canada was nominally independent.
Well, World War
you know
One,
what
we
I
were
mean?
just a British regiment.
Exactly.
I think,
Like
in World War
we
One.
didn't fight independently at all.
No, we
but
fought
at
as
the
a British
same
unit.
time, we did.
I think.
We did like an exemplary job, and we definitely did set ourselves apart, which I think gave us some form of national identity for sure. And we were definitely shifting that way already.
Ask
for
Norwegians
sure.
and Icelanders what they think of World War II Canadian soldiers.
Why?
Well, we liberated them.
Oh, I was gonna say Iceland. Yeah, Norway for sure. I didn't know we did Iceland as well.
I might be wrong about Iceland, but I know we liberated Norway.
For sure. Well, yeah, Norway and the Netherlands. There was a lot of that's the thing. Like a lot of the way our countries look at each other nowadays is heavily based on World War II. You know what I mean?
You're right.
You're right. It would have changed a lot.
Yeah.
And like we didn't even touch on Benito Mussolini either, right? Like because
we didn't. I think we should maybe just save him for another episode. To be honest with you,
we could, because that would have went a lot differently as well. You know what I mean? So we
maybe he would have become Hitler
too. Right? Maybe
Italy would have become a
fascism,
superpower.
right? Like fascism was kind of his idea. It wasn't necessarily Hitler's, right? So it was, there. And, not to say that Italian fascism and German fascism was the same, because it wasn't. But but either way, yeah, like we could definitely do a part 2 on this, because there's still a lot. Like I said, our entire history was shaped by this conflict, right? So, and I think large part of that conflict was based on that one person, not entirely. And I don't think we would have been free of conflict, from the 40s up until now if that one person had died. But I think that major conflict probably would not have happened at that time. So it really would have changed the shape of history for sure.
So, final question: on a rating out of 10 or rating out of 100. What percentage of history would be different? That's kind of a hard question. If Hitler was killed,
well, so history from like 1930 onwards, you mean? I suppose.
Yeah, 1931 onward. Yeah,
I think I completely different. Like I would say at least 70% different. You know what I mean? I think we would obviously see a lot of the same technologies happen, maybe not at the exact same rate, because obviously we do know that war pushes technological advancement for sure.
Would I have my Nintendo Switch if it wasn't for World War II? The question you gotta ask yourself.
Well, exactly, right? You never know. Maybe not, man. Honestly, if you think about it, Nintendo might not have even been a thing, at least in the Western market. Right?
Who knows how the war being different would have affected Japanese history? Like you said, we haven't even touched on that.
Yeah, I was gonna say we could do that again as well, because that would have been completely different. So I think it would, at least I would say in the 70s, man, because I think it would have been very different. A lot of different things would have happened. A lot of our cultural identities would be different. Borders would certainly be different. So yeah,
I think 100%, man. I think it's 100% different. I think it's different. I think, well, maybe 90%, because I think a lot of the same sentiments still existed without Hitler, and I think that's the main thing that we need to not
I agree with that,
forget is that in terms of wanting to a restoration of German nationalism, scapegoating Jewish people, there was a lot of these key things, but obviously Hitler was a key player. But then my reason for being a little apprehensive, like I said in the beginning, is Mein Kampf and how many people read that book and identified with it. But is that just he captured a popular sentiment that already existed,
and would that book have been as popular if he wasn't a politician? You know what I mean? Because like if he, because like he probably that book became popular likely because people were like, "Hey, who's this guy? Like, let's read about it." You know what I mean?
Oh, he's that guy that led the charge on the.
On the parliament, the Reichstag.
But legit, think about the guy in the moose antlers last year that charged the Capitol in the U.S. If he wrote a book from prison, think about how many people in his political theater would read that book.
Oh, for sure. Well, it's already happening if you look at it now, man. Like I guarantee you, there's going to be books about the storming of the Capitol building, right? Like, and they'll probably try to suppress that for as long as they can because they're still arresting people and they're still charging people and things like that. But that's even if it's like fictionalized, you know what I mean? Like it's still going to happen, and people are going to eat.
I'm worried about sensationalist works coming out about it.
Oh, 100%. Like it's going to happen. Of course it will, because I was actually just watching a video about this last night, of just how a lot of these people are, they're like a lot of these right-wing nationalists are getting banned off social media platforms, right? Just because of their views, but they're all literally coalescing in new social media platforms that are being built to allow them to be there, and they're being radicalized because there's absolutely no regulation of what they're saying on these places.
Literally the same, literally how the Taliban radicalized people, literally the same tactic.
Oh, 100%, man. It's
banned from using certain social media, created their own social media, and then
well, if you think about it, right? Like if you control the narrative amongst a group of people who are angry because they've been ostracized from the mainstream media, holy shit, you're that's just a brewing pot for some bad stuff to happen.
A breeding ground.
Yeah,
sure.
Exactly.
For sure. Well, man, I think it's been a good one. One thing I did want to say is I want to make it very clear. I don't think all Americans are racist. When I asked the question of would America be as racist, I meant on a scale of racism is what I was talking about.
And it's not even just America, right? Like we were talking about.
I'm talking world. How much more racist would the world be?
It is globally,
and I think a lot of we learned in high school and schools about the Holocaust and stuff like that, and that really was, even if it wasn't said expressly, it's this is why why you shouldn't be racist.
Well, this is what happened when it gets out of hand. This is what it leads to. You know what I mean? When you blame a group of people for something that they can't possibly be,
or you blame a group of people for something a role that you put them into.
Exactly.
I mean, Jews historically had to be tax collectors and money and lenders because Christians couldn't lend money, or that was the belief in
couldn't lend money
medieval Europe, right? Yeah, you couldn't lend money with interest. So what incentive was there for someone to pay it back? And to ask someone to pay that money back is you'll get your reward in heaven.
Well, there was no incentive.
Like the other guy would say,
right? Like there was no money lenders. Like people, why would I lend you money if there's no incentive?
So that's the thing. So Europe basically forced Jewish people into those kind of roles. And they wouldn't hire them for other roles because they were Jewish. So it was a double-sided racism that, if when the Jews were, or when Germans saw that Jews were, well, they might not, they also might not have been a part of World War I. So that might be also why they were exempt from certain things, right? So it created a situation that made them the perfect scapegoat, but it was created by Europeans.
That's the thing, and would that have, just perpetuated in a different way, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the thing. Was it just a boiling pot that was eventually going to boil over? And that's the hard thing. And that's the great thing about this show is we can, speculate and say, what if this happened? What this happened based on, key events in time. Otherwise, Zach, thanks for doing this today.
Yeah,
and thanks for anybody that listens to our podcast. We're hoping to create a lot more content here, and I think we've talked about trying to get something out bi-weekly. or fortnightly, the proper term, every 2 weeks, and just kind of either touch on, like I said, either historical things or how something historical, like a disease coming back or something, for example, hint, hint, could be, catastrophic into the future.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like how it could have reshaped.
Yeah. What would happen if? Yeah.
And
exactly.
And how things are now. So I think even like we saw in this episode, there's things we can still touch on just based on this one thing, because certain events are just so absolutely I don't know, I don't want to say memorable, but they just shape the way that
they're a cornerstone of history.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it. So we'll continue putting out this content of just touching on we're going to tweak what happened in history a little bit and see how things might have changed.
And we'll see you hopefully again in a couple weeks on the What If History podcast, past, present, and future. And otherwise, have a great day, and thanks for listening. Stay safe out there.